Even as the remote work era clouds the future for offices, one segment of the business is drawing cash from investors, including Blackstone and KKR, big private equity investors. And more than $10 billion has gone towards buying buildings used for life sciences and other research this year, according to Real Capital Analytics Incorporated. That accounted for approximately 4% of all global commercial real estate transactions through May, double the share from last year. Joining us to talk about that further is Seyi Omidiora, who is an analyst with Financial Derivatives Company Limited. Seyi, thank you so much for joining us. This real estate discussion with respect to funds going into life sciences, what's behind that?
All right, well, now, what we have seen has been an increasing trend in this part of real estate over the last 4 or 5 years now. Even before the pandemic started, there was about a 90% increase in rental rates when compared to the 20% in commercial or conventional office buildings, even before the pandemic started. But since the pandemic started, we saw about a 188% increase in rental rates and, of course, investment in that sector, going up from about $9 billion to about $25 billion in 2020. That was an increase from 2019. And, of course, the drivers behind that are quite a few. We know for a fact that medical doctors or medical scientists, unlike conventional office workers, cannot work from home. They have to be present, they have to be in the labs. So that, of course, was one of the reasons why a lot of rental rates were up all through last year. And again, another thing we saw was with medical sciences as well, we also saw that a lot of these people also, a lot of these buildings can't also are built specifically for medical sciences and they cannot be made, or they cannot be done, or they cannot be they cannot be used, for another sort of office building. So those are two of the primary drivers behind the increase in life sciences real estate.
All right, so but that kind of demands $10 billion or so that we saw, I think fiscal year 2020, right, or so, to the maybe through Q1 of this. That lots of money in that sector, but it can't possibly go on forever, can it? There has to be some form of inflection point at this point. When do you expect that to happen?
Well, yes. So now this is something that we can't quite tell for certain, but we sure know that this trend cannot persist indefinitely. Now, we know that for starters, the capitalization rate, which is the rate of return for real estate for life sciences buildings, is decreasing. We have seen a crunch or some kind of compression to less than 4%, which is kind of less than that which we will see in other real estate sectors like industrial buildings. And that, of course, is because of the capital inflows into medical sciences. And this, of course, is because there is kind of like an oversupply at the moment. People are erecting buildings even without tenants available at the moment, and of course, this of course is going to lead to a decrease in returns, which of course will lead to some pullback in terms of capital inflow into the into that particular section of real estate. Another thing we have seen, of course, is the fact that residential or life sciences buildings, of course, are 15%, they cost about 15% more than conventional office buildings. And this, of course, is because of the kinds of buildings they are. They need to be built to a certain standard, higher ceilings, stronger foundations. And if they can't find tenants for those particular buildings, then, of course, it's going to lead to a lot of unoccupied places, and that's, of course, one of the hazards for investors as well.
What about the trade-off between deforestation and innovation? So the more, in fact, this even affects wildlife. The more you look for these buildings for life sciences, the more it has invested in real estate. As you increase the real estate investment, you've got to now reduce forestation to make space for that, right? But on the other hand, the benefits of what it is you're doing in life sciences is innovation. So innovation goes up, reduction in forestation. So what's the trade-off? How does that work out?
Okay, yes. So one thing we have seen, or one thing we hope we can use to manage this trade-off is these buildings that are being erected, we hope they can kind of implement environmentally conducive or environmentally friendly practices within those buildings, such that there is kind of like, at least at the minimum, a zero-sum giveaway.
Right.
Yeah,
because
exactly. Because if you are cutting trees, then of course you are increasing the likelihood of carbon emissions. But if there are sustainable practices, say the kinds of equipment, say medical gloves, for instance, being used are recyclable, reusable, that kind of thing, where, I mean, a lot of environmentally sustainable and friendly ways through which we can kind of balance out the effect of cutting down trees. That's one thing. Another way, of course, is by, say, instead of cutting down trees, look for old buildings that are no longer in use.
Well, we got a lot of old buildings here.
We do. So, of course, pull them down and then, of course, erect new structures in their place to take up those places instead of having to cut down your trees.
Since we're talking deforestation, you got to tell us your thoughts on what's happening in Gabon. And are there any lessons? I especially want to know how it makes sense, or if there's any moral issues there with a country being paid to reduce its own carbon emissions. What do you make of the Gabon compensation from CAFI?
Okay, so now it depends on who you ask, really. Okay. Because if you are familiar with, there's also another innovative way of dealing with this sort of thing, which is carbon trading.
Yeah.
Now, overall, basically, it means where a country or a company or an organization, whatever, has a certain mandate or a certain quota of greenhouse gases they can emit. Okay. Now, if they want to go beyond their quota, they buy rights from another country or another company or whatever, and that particular company they are buying the rights from reduce their own emissions. This way, there is kind of like, there is no increase in emissions overall. Yeah. But the question is whether or not this is moral. But I would like to think if the result is great, it doesn't really matter how we get there.
Okay. So any lessons then with what CAFI is doing here in partnership with Gabon and other countries for the rest of the continent? Anything to learn?
Well, it is. We should know that for African countries, we should know that it is an all-inclusive thing when it comes to climate change. It's going to affect us as well. Now, for Gabon in particular, we should note that the country itself has about 90% of it is basically forests, and a lot of these trees also sequester a lot of carbon when compared to similar trees in the Amazon, for instance. Right. And of course, about 60% of Africa's forest elephants population are also in Gabon.
Right.
So of course, this also enhances the wildlife and it also preserves wildlife, as well as in addition to, of course, what it's doing in terms of housing carbon and all of that. But when we now look at the lessons for the African continent as well, we should know that, okay, there are going to be certain implications for countries who do not, after a while, who do not actually come in line with the Paris Climate Accord to cut down emissions. Yeah. There are always going to be implications. As well, there are the likelihood of further deterioration of the environment. And we've seen Lake Chad, for instance, which has the volume of the water in Lake Chad has decreased by about 90% from 1965 to about 2010, 2011. So, of course, this of course, is because of the unsustainable practices that has been happening in all of these places in Africa. And of course, we need to cut down on those things, because even with the Lake Chad thing now, we have seen that a lot of displacement, people can't farm, people can't fish, because of course with the decrease in the volume of water, there can't be enough fish. So of course, feeding also is also going to be impacted. So a lot of
tourism.
things, and tourism as well. So these are a number of things we should look at as well. So I believe that we need, as a continent, we need to look into these things.
Fantastic. Learn lessons there. Seyi Omidiora, Analyst with Financial Derivatives Company Limited. Thank you so much for joining us.